The Latino Equity Fund's taking its mission to a new stage after a pivot during the pandemic. For pandemic relief efforts over the past year, the fund provided $362,000, drawing on contributions to its legacy fund, the sole philanthropic fund in Massachusetts focused on the Latinx community. Will try to make a difference by addressing health needs and economic inequality. To tell us what that could mean is the fund's director, Evelyn Barahona. Thank you very much for being with us, Evelyn.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Evelyn, maybe we can look back a little bit about over the past year and a half, and what about the money that the fund spent already to relieve the effects of COVID?
So when we first began dispersing funds during the beginning part of the COVID, one of the key things that we transitioned to was to just get funds to the organizations that were trying to meet the basic needs of the community. There was some huge influx of, food insecurity and a lot of issues related to like basic necessities. So that was one portion. And the second one was we actually invested in just having an educational outreach program through social media and work with a communications organization to do that so that people would be aware of the resources available to them based on their community.
I know we're still seeing figures that show disparity in vaccination rates, which I think are pretty low, at least relatively low for the Latinx community. How important was social media to doing something about that?
Oh, it was very critical. We found that a lot of people were relying on social media through their phones just to get information, and having this sort of educational campaign that's focused on where to find resources both in English and Spanish that was culturally competent was very critical. Additionally, we also partner up with El Mundo in ensuring that that message continued on to ensure that they knew about vaccine access and also like just general information that most communities need to know about.
What did you accomplish with the aid to businesses?
With what business?
In other words, that some of the Black and Latinx owned businesses that were struggling during the pandemic.
Well, one of the ways that we supported the business community was when we were looking to sort of advocate for the governor. We recognized that there were two companies that was doing mass mobile vaccinations, and in a way to support this community and also the business was we advocated for some dollars to be directed toward the Latino community and utilizing these two providers, which knew the community really well and were culturally competent and equipped to handle and also ensure that people were getting access to the vaccines.
What do you feel that the mobile vax effort accomplished? Because one of the things I picture right away, you get this large vehicle, you've got the signage, it's in a language that people can understand. People working on this, they might reflect the community as well. Do you think that made much of a change?
I think it made a difference in particular communities. I know that when a lot of this partnership happened between these two companies, one of the things that I found very striking is that way they approached the community. And one of the things that they did was made it more about a celebration about it getting vaccinated and utilizing their health providers and like health community centers to be part of it. So it wouldn't just stop at the vaccine, that there was also an opportunity for it to be sort of translated and have an avenue to also get more healthcare medical attention.
I want to ask you about another part of the economic fallout from the pandemic here. And this is about the large number of people from the Latinx community who are in the hospitality sector. That whole sector has been hit pretty hard. It's still going to take a while to recover. But what about the people who've either lost their jobs or who've been sort of downgraded to jobs that pay less money?
It's been hard. It's been a horrible reality, as you can imagine. And for us in particular, one of the key things that we've always thought about in the fund was, how to promote economic prosperity. When this pandemic hit and it became very obvious who was being impacted, it really drove home for us why we need to use our platform to have workforce initiatives that create mobility. Because I think folks in this sector were sort of limited in some cases based either on language or skill set. And for us, we're very focused on like, how do we find and invest in initiatives with our stakeholders and ensure that there's pathways of growth and mobility and perhaps short-term solutions like having access to technical programs that allow for someone to just, learn a skill and also be able to advance.
Coming back to the health disparities, certainly the pandemic made those more noticeable. Any ideas about what you want to work on in that area in the future with the fund?
Sure. So one of the things that we began looking into was just ways in which we can make it more equitable. Initially, we had invested in a vaccine equity hub of research of Latino researchers that were looking very acutely at not only so much the impact of what was going on with COVID, but also ways in which we can look at the root causes, that we can sort of look at it by municipality. Other things that we're thinking of is what are ways in which we can use our platform that includes grant making, but also research and convening and elevating issues related to healthcare. And one of the things that we are thinking of is sort of collaborating with a cohort of executives of ways that we can sort of highlight some issues and maybe, advocate for some policy.
One of the other things that we've learned from the pandemic is the potential value of just giving people in need a certain amount of money and let them make decisions about what they want to do. I know that's not something that the Latino Equity Fund is involved in directly, but it's part of the environment out there. How do you see working with that as maybe part of the solution to your agenda?
I think that oftentimes the solution is within the community. And so being able to like communicate and also understand what are the top priorities for them also allows for stakeholders like the Latino Equity Fund to work collaboratively. And I think that like if people know what they need and are able to use it, stakeholders like myself and others are able to support that.
I want to ask you also about the significance of the fund in light of what the census figures tell us. They've just come out in recent months. This is, arguably the largest growing population, and maybe not in terms of the rate of growth, but certainly the size of the growth. What does that mean about your future?
It means that it's very critical for us to ensure that we have a prosperity within the community. And I think that's always been sort of the headline for the Latino Equity Fund, is that when you have a growing community, but you have pockets of like community members not thriving, that doesn't just impact the community itself, it also impacts the Commonwealth and the state. And so for us, we always found it that like, okay, what are ways that we can like asset build? How do we invest so that we ensure that we have a really thriving community? Because if you have a growing community, then you have a thriving state.
And finally, what about the importance of the fund itself? I mean, not just the amount of money you raise, but I guess the platform it gives you to engage with a larger cast of players in the state. How important is that?
It's really critical. I mean, for us, when we were thinking of expanding our framework, it was already happening. We already had started doing convenings. And then when we intentionally added advocacy and civic leadership meaning being a convener and connector, we realized that being a resource representation for the Latino community is something that would only add value to not only the Latino nonprofit sector themselves, but the issues.